Okay, welcome everybody to our services tonight. Ken is on vacation this week. He asked me to fill in for this lesson, and glad to do that. We'll be looking at 1 Kings chapters 13 through 16. We'll have to keep moving because there is a great deal of material there, lots of events. We'll go through them as quickly as we can. First of all, here's an outline of the book of 1 Kings. It's a little bit less definitive as far as outlining. It's mostly kings. King, this king, that king, Israel, Judah. But this is from Nelson's Bible Dictionary here. We're right there about where the arrow is. We're going to be talking about what happened after Jeroboam made his big mistake. Remember when the people said, take it easy on us. Don't be as hard as your father was. And he said, if you think my father was hard, just watch me. He didn't take good advice. So the kingdom divided, and that's where we are tonight as we begin with chapter 13. We're going to look at a number of the kings in these chapters. Before we begin with the study, let's have prayer. Our Father in heaven, we are thankful that we can assemble tonight. We're thankful that in spite of all the changes that are going on and the challenges that are before us in this world, and especially right now during this time of so much sickness, we're thankful that we can safely be together and use precautions that we do and still be together and be with one another, at least for the most part. We're thankful for those who are not able to be with us can tune in and be with us in mind at least, as we study together tonight, as we look at your word. Help us to learn from your word. Help us to see the mistakes that were made by the various kings of your people, to avoid those mistakes. Help us to notice the good things that some of them did as they tried to worship you, do your will, and their heart was close to you. Help us to imitate those qualities in our lives. Bless our study together in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we'll have a map here first of all we want to look at. And as usual, it's rather difficult because it's just hard to get a map of any size area on here and pin down. But what we've got there are some cities that are going to be especially noted in tonight's lesson. We have on the upper right-hand corner there, Tirzah, which is going to be basically the capital of the northern tribes, at least for a period of time for these first few kings. We have the city there of Samaria, which at the very end we're going to see that is about to become the capital city for the 10 northern tribes of Israel. And then we have Jericho, which is going to come in at the end of one of our chapters tonight. We have Jerusalem, of course, where it was the center of the capital for the southern kingdom. And then we have Ramah. We're not going to discuss that particular series of events about Ramah too much, but we'll just note that it was a place of conflict between the northern and southern kingdoms, and finally it wound up with the southern kingdom and it remained territory for that. Okay, our first chapter is entitled God's Prophet Visits Jeroboam. We have a visit of a man, a prophet of God, who is told to go, but he is not named. We don't know who he is. We just don't know. But he goes to Jeroboam, who's already made serious mistakes. He's already brought idolatry into God's people, a mistake that they never recovered from, and his name is mentioned in infamy, notoriety for several more instances as we go through the book of 1 Kings. And behold, a man of God went from Judah to Bethel by the word of the Lord, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. Who was supposed to be burning incense? Well, priests were supposed to be doing the burning of incense. Then he cried out against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, this is the prophet, the old prophet, who is not named, thus says the Lord, behold, a child, Josiah by name, shall be born to the house of David, and on you he shall sacrifice the priest of the high places who burn incense on you, and men's bones shall be burned on you. He's brought a prophecy from God. It's not a prophecy that Jeroboam is going to like in the least. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord has spoken. In other words, let me show you here now why this comes from God. I didn't make this up. I didn't put this together myself. This comes from God, and I'm going to show you that it does. Surely the altar shall split apart, and the ashes on it shall be poured out. Well, that's exactly what happened, of course. When God sends his true prophet for a true message to someone who needs to hear it, what he says is going to happen, and it happened. So it came to pass, I can't keep up here with my slides. So it came to pass, and I'm getting just portions of this. We're not going to go word for word through all of these. It came to pass when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God that he stretched out his hand. You kind of see him stretched out probably like this, pointing at him. And when the king points at you, that's either very good or very bad. And in this case, it was intended to be very bad, but it didn't work out that way. Jeremiah pointed at him, but the point didn't last because his hand withered, and he could not bring it back. The word withered is a lot like this, literally a flower. This moisture is removed from it, it shrivels up. That's what happened to his hand. And he could not do anything with it. He was helpless, and he would have been with one hand for the rest of his life if not for it being healed a little bit after this. He said, arrest him. His hand withered, he could not pull it back. The altar split apart, and the ashes poured according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. Now, later on, the event that the old prophet is saying is going to happen is, I shouldn't call him the old prophet. The old prophet comes up here in just a moment. This is just an unnamed prophet. Exactly what the unnamed prophet is going to be said later on during the time of Josiah as far as bones being burned upon that. But I'm going to let Ken talk about that when he gets to that part of 1 Kings. Just know that this came to happen even though it was many, many years later and all of these kings were gone. Okay, so it split apart, and after that, Jeroboam asked for it to be restored. Then the king said to the man of God, his tune changed completely. He recognized that it was not a good thing to tamper with the will of God, to try to arrest a prophet who just told him, here's what God has said is going to happen. Please entreat the favor of the Lord your God. Notice the Lord your God, which is kind of sad, since he's supposed to be Jeroboam's God as well. That's interesting phraseology. And pray for me that my hand may be restored to me. So the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him. Now, every reason in the world to think, hey, Jeroboam is going to repent here. Man, somebody does something like that to you, God makes your hand wither away just like that and then brings it back just like that at the words of his prophet. You'd say, well, he's going to straighten out now. No more idolatry for Jeroboam. Well, unfortunately, that didn't happen. However, at this time, he's going to be at least hospitable to this unnamed prophet because he did get the use of his hand back. The king said to the man of God, come home with me and refresh yourselves, and I will give you a reward. So he's all 180 here now. He's going to give him a reward instead of arresting him because of the events that took place. But the man of God said to the king, if you were to give me half your house, I would not go in with you, nor would I eat bread, nor drink water in this place. For so it was commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, you shall not eat bread, nor drink water, nor return by the same way you came. So he went another way and did not return by the way he came to Bethel. So the prophet, the unnamed prophet, has specific instructions here. And those instructions were, don't stay there. Deliver your message, and what's going to happen to the altar is going to happen, and then you leave. And that's what he began to do and should have done and should have been committed to the completion of it. So he wouldn't go to the king's house. He wouldn't take any reward from the king, which was right. He wouldn't stay to eat and drink there. He turned around and went back. However, there was someone who interfered with his obedience. It's a sad story. I put a star there to remind me that I don't have all the scripture down here. We're just going to paraphrase. We're going to talk about it. Because some people who were there, sons of an old prophet, saw what had happened, went home and told Dad, the old prophet, look what happened. He said, I've got to meet this guy. He said, get the donkey ready. Saddle him up. I'm going to catch up with him. And he did catch up with him. He said, you've got to come back to my house. I've got to feed you and give you something to drink. Just got to do it. And The unnamed prophet said the same thing to this old prophet that he said to the king, King Jeroboam, if he had just stuck with that answer. But there was a lie. We're talking about an old prophet of God here. He wanted the presence, the fellowship of that other prophet so badly that he said, I'm a prophet too. And the Lord said for me to tell you to come back and have something to eat and drink and rest with me a while. Now, you think, well, that's pretty bad on the old prophet's part. Certainly it is. You think, well, how can we blame the unnamed prophet who brought the message there, the prophecy, because after all, this guy says, I'm a prophet and the Lord told me something different. Well, that's where we get in trouble sometimes. He had what the Lord had told him. He heard what this fellow had told him. He never confirmed with the Lord. You know, he could have confirmed with the Lord, I suppose, right then. He said, Lord, is this right? And you want me to do this? But he didn't. He took the older prophet at his word, and he went back to the house with him. And while he was there, the Lord spoke to him. See, he should have let the Lord speak to him before he ever went back and kept doing what he was doing. The Lord spoke to him and says, because you didn't listen to me, you're in trouble. And I can imagine maybe what he said to the old prophet when he heard that. So he got back, saddled his donkey, took off again, and there was a line that met him as he was traveling back toward Jerusalem. Not too far, apparently, because the old prophet came and found his body. The lion had killed him because of his disobedience. Now, again, going back to Jeroboam, after that sad story there, Jeroboam did not change. We would think that at least he'd be softened up a little bit to do the will of God in this particular situation. After these events here, that with the altar and what I've just mentioned, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. But he made priests from every class of people for the high places. You see, he'd lost a lot of his talent. And the people go back to Jerusalem. That's where the true priest would be for the most part. And that's where the place of worship was. And they had their festivals a certain time. And Jeroboam changed all that, made up his own feast times and had his own priest and put up the golden calves in Dan and Bethel. And he became one of the priests of the high places. What happened in the high place? Nothing good. God never wanted you to come up to a high place because that was associated with pure idolatry back then. Get closer to your pagan deities by getting in a high place. They could hear you better. God never wanted anything like that. And this thing was the sin of the house of Jeroboam, so as to exterminate and destroy it from the face of the earth. Jeroboam and his descendants would be destroyed because Jeroboam caused Israel to sin, and Israel never, ever got over it. They never straightened out. They maybe made a few strides here and there, but for the most part, it went from evil to even more evil. Okay, so that's chapter 13. Let's find a bit of wisdom here in chapter 14. Try to do that in each 13. Try to do that in each chapter case. In chapter 13, I would suggest to you that a bit of wisdom here is disobedience is disobedience. Doesn't matter if you're Jeroboam, you're sitting on the throne, and you're causing Israel to sin, and you're mocking the will of God, and even a sign like that doesn't change you. It's disobedience. However, if you're also a prophet of God, and God says, do this, do it this way, don't alter it, don't deviate from this, that's disobedience too. Disobedience is disobedience, no matter who, no matter what part of God's commandments they ignore. And so both Jeroboam and the unnamed prophet here were guilty of severe disobedience. Jeroboam didn't pay with his life at first. He's going to suffer later on. But the unnamed prophet paid with his life. Now, as we move to chapter 14, first let me give you this. I wanted to share you this about the dynasties and what was going on during all of these kings, kind of set the tone for the rest of it. Because Judah, the two southern tribes, which is known as Judah, even though Benjamin was there too, had 20 kings over the period of the existence there of the divided kingdom. They had either 6 or 8 that would be considered good kings, depending on how you count them. People don't count them the same way. But basically 8 who at least did some good. They weren't perfect. Some were good and didn't turn out so well. Some didn't start out so well and turned out better. But somewhere around 8 good kings, 12 wicked kings out of those 20. However, on Israel's side, the 10 tribes, the northern tribes, 9 dynasties. In other words, whereas Judah had, the seed of David right straight on through, it was all family, all sons of sons of sons. Over here we have 9 different dynasties. Part of that happened because some of the dynasties got destroyed, didn't they? Because God wanted that to happen because of their great disobedience. And out of the 19 kings that they had, or 20 kings that they had, only one was kind of so good, and that was Jehu. Now, I'll let Ken talk to you about him too. He did a few things the Lord wanted him to when he first became king, as he was dealing with Baal and dealing with the family of Ahab and Jezebel, who were very, very wicked. He pleased God, but his heart was not with God. So basically they had 20 kings that didn't do a very good job. But they had the one there, Jehu, who was a little bit better. On the Judah side of it, of those 20 kings, there were 5 assassinations, 2 were stricken by God, and 3 were exiled. On the Israel side, there were 7 assassinations, 1 suicide, 1 was stricken by God, and 1 was exiled to Assyria when they were taken captivity. So we see a time of kings on both sides of God's divided people who went through some very, very turbulent times. And that's what we're looking at now. They both sinned before God. It's not as if Israel was totally overcome with evil and Judah was all good. It didn't happen that way. At that time, Abijah, the son of Jeroboam. Now pay attention here. Abijah, we're going to get to Ahijah in just a minute. Those names, they're just pretty close. So Ahijah is the prophet. We're going to see him in just a minute. But Abijah was the son of Jeroboam. He was a child. He became sick. And Jeroboam said to his wife, "Please arise and disguise yourself, that they may not recognize you as the wife of Jeroboam, and go to Shiloh." Indeed, Ahijah, the prophet, is there, who told me that I would be king over this people. And of course, that's true. God wanted him to be king, but he wanted him to obey. Also take with you 10 loaves, some cakes, jar of honey, go to him, and he will tell you what will become of the child. So he's trying to give him some gifts here, butter him up, hoping for the promise that his child would be okay. However, that was not what he found out. As he goes, of course, Ahijah is already told by the Lord who he is. There's not going to be any subterfuge here. It's not going to work. Go tell Jeroboam, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel," this is Ahijah the prophet, who recognized it, "because I exalted you from among the people and made you ruler over my people Israel, and tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you, and yet you have not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments and who followed me with all his heart to do only that which was right in my eyes." And it goes on to say, except for that deal with Uriah the Hittite. It does mention that. But otherwise, man after God's own heart. And he says to Jeroboam's wife, he says, "You tell him, you've not done that. You caused a problem in Israel, which is going to be continual. But you have done more evil than all who were before you." And that's pretty bad, but you know what? As we go through these kings, it's just going to get worse. We're going to have more and more kings. You're the worst one yet. Next one, you're the worst one yet. That's how bad it was. "For you have gone and made for yourself other gods, molded images to provoke me to anger, and have cast me behind your back. Therefore, behold, I will bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam every male in Israel, bond and free." In other words, Jeremiah's seed was gone. This is why there were different dynasties, 9 different dynasties. The families of some of these kings were destroyed. God says, your family's not going to survive. It's not going to be son to son to son to son ruling over Israel, because you have gone to other gods and you've turned your back on me. "I will take away the remnant of the house of Jeroboam as one takes away refuge until it is gone. And moreover, the Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel who shall cut off the house of Jeroboam." And that's going to happen later on. "For the Lord will strike Israel as a reed is shaken in the water. He will uproot Israel and will scatter them beyond the river." And the river, the Euphrates, guess what was over there? Assyria. Of course, Jeroboam wasn't going to live to see it, but that's what was going to happen to his people because of what he started. Idol worship there among his people. "Was scattered beyond the river because they have made their wooden images, provoking the Lord to anger." So, not a good forecast for Jeroboam, and for that matter for his people, because it was going to just keep getting worse. "And he will give he will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who sinned and who made Israel to sin. Again, repeatedly, we're going to see that referred to. Jeroboam started. That doesn't make anybody else less guilty down the line, but Jeroboam started it. And continually, the writer of this book is going to say, you know, this king so-and-so, he just followed right in the footsteps of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin many, many times. Okay? The period that Jeroboam reigned was 22 years, so he rested with his fathers. Then Nadab, his son, reigned in his place. Okay, meanwhile, here's what's going on with Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem. Now, Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord. Rehoboam was not a godly leader either. And they provoked him to jealousy with their sins more than all that their fathers had done. Why? For they built themselves high places, sacred pillars, and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. And there were also perverted persons in the land. Perverted, speaking specifically about those who were caught up in idolatry. The things that God destroyed or told them to destroy, the people of the Canaanites, all those people there, when they came into the land because of the sins they were doing. Israel, Judah, caught up in the same thing. They did according to the abomination of the nations which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. So it was not well, but the conflict that was going on. You know, when you don't have God on either side, you're going to have conflict probably, aren't you? And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all their days. So Rehoboam rested with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. Then Abijah, not the same Abijah we've already looked at, you know, common name apparently back then, his son reigned in his place. So bad times going on both sides of the divided kingdom. And as we move into chapter 15, let's just get something out of chapter 14. And I'd like for us to remember, always remember the power of influence. The power of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin, and Israel never got over it. From the time of Jeroboam and the first calf at Dan in Bethel until the time when the Assyrians came and took them into captivity. Never got over it. And Jeroboam started it, and he was held accountable for that. And all of his seed was going to be destroyed. We will hopefully get to that in just a few moments. So that's a thought from chapter 14. Now, chapter 15, new kings in Israel and Judah. And we're going to have a lot of kings turning over here in a hurry in just a moment. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijah became king over Judah. And he walked in all the sins of his father, which he had done before him. His heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. Didn't take very long in generations for hearts to turn away. A heart that was a heart after God to a heart here that was not loyal to the Lord. That's what we find here. Now, my star is there to remind me to mention, because I'm not going to read the fact, that yet God preserved a lamp in Jerusalem. In other words, he kept the seed of David on the throne. That was his promise. The Messiah was going to come through the seed of David. The seed of David was going to reign over his people, and then the Messiah was to come. God kept that promise. And so a verse or two here later, it's the lamp of Jerusalem. God kept the lamp in Jerusalem. In other words, a descendant of David was on the throne ruling over Judah, even though most of their hearts were not right. The majority were not close to God. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, and so the way that they identify these kings is often by how long this other king had been ruling. And so you can put that all together on a page. And I would have given you a bunch of pages tonight with all that on it, except we're not handing out any objects, okay? But you can look this up on the internet, all kinds of charts that show the kings of Israel, kings of Judah, and they'll have little colors on there for good kings, bad kings, and sometimes the years that they reign. And that's how the writer here prefaces them, according to who had been reigning how long when this king became king at the other side, northern versus southern. Okay, Jeroboam, king of Israel. Asa became king over Judah. Asa was one of the good guys. Asa was a good king. He reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. And he banished the perverted persons from the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. He made a change. He did what his fathers were not willing to do, and yet he got rid of them. But even more remarkable than that is Asa took care of grandmother. He also removed Maacah, his grandmother, from being queen mother. Remember, she was a queen mother. And apparently she was just about as evil as her son was. And now her grandson's going to say, no, Mom, Grandmom, we're not going to have that anymore. Don't know if they were close or not, but after this they might not have been close. But it's probably a good thing because she was given to idolatry. Because she had made an obscene image of Asherah, and Asa cut down her obscene image and burned it in the brook Kidron, not far there from the city of Jerusalem. But the high places were not removed. Okay? A lot of times these good kings, they left little things like that. They didn't purge. Josiah was probably the best purger of idolatry that there was. He just kind of swooped over the land and cleaned out everything in 3 different phases. But Asa, Asa's heart was loyal to the Lord in all his days. So he didn't do everything maybe he should have, get rid of the high places, but he did a whole lot. And as far as the writer is concerned here telling the story, he was good. Now, there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Remember, there was war between Jeroboam and Rehoboam? I don't know if I put that verse in here or not, but it says that. And there's war between Asa and Baasha. And you know what's going to happen on down the line? More and more war between these kings all the time they were kings. God's people fighting against each other. Now, that wasn't permanent. There were some times when they worked together against a common enemy, but many times it was like this. So Asa rested with his fathers. Then Jehoshaphat, his son, reigned in his place. So more can be said about Asa, and there's some in Chronicles. And anyway, that's all we're going to have time for right now. Okay, so we continue now. Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, became king over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. You say we can't go exactly chronological because they didn't live and die and get in and put on the throne chronologically at the same times. We kind of got to jump around here. Became king over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel 2 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Then Baasha conspired against him and killed him. Well, Baasha not only conspired against him and killed him, but Baasha is going to have before him the role of wiping out Jeroboam's descendants. That's what God approved of. Said, Jeroboam, your seed's not going to continue. And it didn't. And Baasha was a big part of that. And Baasha killed all the house of Jeroboam. He did not leave Jeroboam anyone that breathed, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite. That's the prophet that we've seen it here a couple of times. It appeared to Jeroboam, and then later his wife was sent to in disguise and all that. Same Abijah here. So Jeroboam's seed was wiped out just as the Lord said it was going to be. Now, in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, became king over all Israel in Tirzah. That was the city we looked at in the upper right corner of that map with the yellow arrow pointing toward that. And for a period of time, that sort of served as the center, the royal center of the 10 northern tribes, or Israel. It's going to change here before too long. And he reigned there 24 years. He did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of Jeroboam. Familiar phrase. Going to see that over and over. Walked in the way of Jeroboam, and he sinned by the way in which he had made Israel sin. So pretty much like his predecessors is what he's going to be doing. Now, for chapter 15, here's the point I'd like for us to think about. It takes a lot of courage to stand up against wickedness. That's a principle for then. That's a principle between now and then. That's a principle now. Again, I would say I don't know what the relationship was between Asa and his grandmother, Maacah, the queen mother, who was just totally absorbed in idolatry. Don't know if they were close when he was little. Don't know what it would have taken. But he had to stand up with courage and say, Grandmother, you're not going to have that. God is not pleased with this. And so we can't have it. I'm sorry, but your Asherah worship there site's got to go. And so does all this other stuff. It took courage. Think of all the other people he had to face. He was king, but think of all the resistance he would get, because we're talking about a people now who had already been a number of years just totally surrounded by this worship of idols, worship of Baal and Asherah and the high places and all of that. And Asa says, no, I've got to do something about that. It takes courage to face this kind of wickedness. And yet, that's exactly what he did. And by the way, I think it's in chapter 15 where it's the lamp in Jerusalem rather than chapter 14. But anyway, it's in one of those chapters. And it refers to the descendant of David being on the throne of Judah. Okay, so that's chapter 15. And I'm moving as quickly as I intended to, and then some, because we've got some time left here for chapter 16. I may slow down. I might even let somebody comment. Nah, I won't do that. All right. Chapter 16, Israel continues to sin. You think, isn't there a point somewhere? You know, there's prophets around, and there's signs like, you know, Jeroboam saw what happened to the altar, and they just continue to sin. And God continues to send messages to them about how wrong they are. Okay, talking now to Baasha. Inasmuch as I lifted you out of the dust and made you ruler over my people, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam and have made my people Israel sin to provoke me to anger with their sins. Okay, stop right there. Okay, that's the action. That's the mistake. That's the sin in which Baasha was guilty, just like his, forefather as a king, Jeroboam. And God is not pleased with him. Did he do something that God said? Yes. He sought vengeance on the household of Jeroboam, just like God said it would be. It was with God's approval. But after that, he went right into the ways of Jeroboam. He was idolatrous as Jeroboam was and led the people that way. And so it gets worse. Okay, now the result of that. We've already seen Jeroboam, you're not going to have any seed left because of your wickedness. Your descendants are gone. You think Baasha would have learned from that, don't you? Baasha was the one who knew that and helped carry it out. And here's Baasha. See what God says to him. Surely I will take away the prosperity of Baasha, posterity, and the posterity, that's hard to say, of his house. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Don't you know he should have seen that coming? He was the tool of God's vengeance on Jeroboam, and now he's going to has brought the same thing on himself. He didn't learn a thing about being loyal to God and what the consequences of that would be. So Baasha has hard times ahead too. And it's going to get even rougher and rougher here, with kings killing kings and so forth. In the 26th year of Asa, king of Judah, Elah, the son of Baasha, became king over Israel and reigned 2 years. Now, his servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, conspired against him. And we're leaving some stuff out here, just try to get the basic facts. Okay, so the king of Baasha, or the son of Baasha is king now, Elah, only going to last 2 years. But he's going to be turned against, conspired against, by the man who's not even part of a royal family of any kind. He's not a prince, he's not any of those things. He's commander of half the chariot. So, some portion of his army, a significant portion maybe, that's all he was. And sometimes that happened back then between military leaders and political leaders. Military leaders could get enough power and they could be pretty treacherous. And he killed him in the 27th year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his place. So Zimri begins the process here of God's judgment on Baasha, which was that all of Baasha's family, all his posterity, was going to be destroyed as well. But, of course, it didn't end here, as we would expect. Then, as soon as he, and I put the Zimri in there so we know who the pronoun refers to, was seated on the throne, he killed all the household of Baasha. Now, again, that was what God had prophesied, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke against Baasha by Jehu the prophet, for all the sins of Baasha, and we're not going to go on there. But, interestingly, and it begins to get very, very brutal here, Zimri is going to set something of a record here. Anybody recall, anybody read ahead or remember the story? How long did Zimri last? About as long as sometimes these military coup people last when they try to take over the throne. Okay, he lasted 7 days. Zimri had reigned in Tirzah 7 days. Not much of a reign to do anything good or bad. And the people were encamped against Gibbethon, that is, all the rest of the people. And he was there and made himself king. And it wasn't a very popular decision, apparently. He didn't have the majority, of the constituency. He, led by Omri, let's see, we're here for that yet? Okay. So all Israel made Omri, commander of the army, king over Israel that day in the camp. So over here to the, I forgot if it's east or west, but it's a few miles away from Tirzah, where Zimri made himself king. Omri is made king there in the camp, but apparently with the approval of most of the people, and certainly with his army. And they make their way back to Tirzah, and where Zimri has, sat there for 7 days. Then Omri and all Israel went up to whatever palace there was that Zimri had taken over there. And Zimri saw that he was vastly outnumbered. He was rejected. There was no way out. And so he took the way out that sometimes people back then took. He burned the king's house down upon himself, and he died. That's the king that we refer to who committed suicide. It was a brutal, brutal process where there were wicked kings here. And you kind of emphasize it when you see that it was only 7 days. Only 7 days. And Zimri received what the people thought was justice. Okay? We'll continue on with Omri, or Omri, say anything you want to. These Hebrew words, I'm not sure if you find agreement among people. Pretty sure you don't. How they pronounce these words, or how we should pronounce them in their English form. In the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri became king over Israel and reigned 12 years. 6 years he reigned in Tirzah. Remember, that's the old sort of base camp, capital, whatever, that kings hung out in. And he bought the hill of Samaria from Shimmer for 2 talents of silver. Samaria, a name we recognize now. We know the name Samaria. That's still going to be around in the New Testament, the city and the province there that stands between Galilee to the north and Jerusalem, Judea to the south. So Samaria comes into play in the rest of biblical history. So he bought it, he built on the hill, and called the name of the city which he built Samaria, after the name of Shimmer, owner of the hill. Not sure how linguistically something like that happens, how Shimmer becomes Samaria, but we do things with the English language people don't understand sometimes. That's where the name came from. Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, hold on. He'd seen all the terrible things that had happened. He said, I better straighten up. I better get Israel straightened up. Let's live for God. Let's get rid of all the idols, and let's make a total spiritual renewal of Israel. No. Omri did worse than all who were before him. Remember, that started out with Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and then another king, and now Omri. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Oh, it's going to work out pretty well. Now, Ahab, and we're not done with Ahab just this week, okay? This is, we're just going to have this one short passage about him here, but there'll be more in the future. Because the Lord chose to tell us a great deal about Ahab and Jezebel. Perhaps because there was something unique about their disobedience. Perhaps because they were characteristic of all the others. Not sure. But we have a great deal about the wickedness of Ahab and Jezebel. Maybe he just wanted us to see what happened to Ahab when he married Jezebel, who was an idol worshiper to begin with, and brought it all with her when they got married. Anyway, Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, here it is again. More than all who were before him. A spiral into a bottomless pit of evil. And he took his wife, Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal. Does that suggest anything? Ethbaal? Yeah, they loved Baal so much they used the name in their names. King of the Sidonians. And the Sidonians, we have Tyre and Sidon on the Mediterranean seacoast there. Phoenicia area, if you look at the map, just a little bit north and west of Israel. And probably to try to make some kind of treaty between the two nations, kind of work together. There'd be intermarriage. And that would generally help relations to be better. And he went and served Baal and worshipped him. His wife took over his religion. His wife took over his heart. His wife took him away from whatever allegiance he may have had to God. Then he set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. By now Samaria's come, that's become the place to be. And Ahab made a wooden image. So he doesn't just say to the daughter of Ethbaal, king of Sidon, okay, you go ahead, you worship your God, I'll worship mine. It doesn't work that way, does it, so often? It certainly didn't work that way in times of the Old Testament. That's why God warned them over and over about intermarrying with pagans. So he was all caught up with Baal worship. And you remember some of the stories about Baal. We'll talk about some of them, or Ken will, in future lessons. And really, really sad, really, really ungodly, disrespectful of God in every way. We're going to end with this little part right here. And this is not all of verses 30 through 34, but it's the gist of it. In the days of Hiel of Bethel, his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. Now you remember what Joshua said back to Joshua 6 and verse 26? Well, it's here if you don't remember. He said, "Cursed be this city. Cursed be the one who lays the foundation, who puts in the gate." In other words, the person who tries to rebuild Jericho. He laid its foundation, Hiel of Bethel, with Abram, his firstborn, and with his youngest son, Segub, he set up its gates, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through Joshua, the son of Nun. So, this chapter, several good points in it, but I'd just like for us to remember, take this away for now at least, evil almost always just gets worse and worse. It's so hard to stop the downward flow of evil. When you start out with Jeroboam the son of Nebat, his influence is on all the people. It's not surprising it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's just the way wickedness often does. And again, for our time today, it's not that different, is it? About evil getting more and more evil. You ignore it for a while. You say, well, that's over there. Then it gets close. You say, well, I can live with it here. Then it's not so bad. And then pretty soon it's in your life. That's the way evil does. It gets worse and worse. And it certainly did here. And it's not over. Because when Ken gets back, you're going to go through some more kings here, especially in Israel. Ahab and Jezebel. Worse and worse and worse. And we're not through hearing that phrase that King so-and-so did worse than all those before him. That is the downhill direction of wickedness. And sadly, among God's people on both sides of the divided kingdom, with just a few exceptions of godly kings. So, Ken will join you for chapter 17, Lord willing, next Wednesday night. Appreciate your good attention, and wish you the best.